На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. It's been a particularly busy week this week in Russian football, and thus because of that, we're not going to do our usual sort of podcast where we review the games, have a look at what's happening, what's coming up, but we're going to have a little bit more of a topical one in which we cover the European games involving Russian clubs in midweek. Take a quick look at a little bit of a detour and look at the 2022 World Cup playoffs, which took place on Friday the 26th of November, and then finish off with some analysis of Ralf Rangnick's set to be announced soon move from Lokomotiv to Manchester United. To quickly start before we do get into European matches, I would like to go through some of the results from last week because it was a very entertaining weekend in Russian football. Unfortunately, we don't quite have time to look through the results too often, but Zenit beat Nizhny 5-1. You had a very pulsating game between Krasnodar and Spartak, where Krasnodar finally got back into winning ways, defeating Spartak 2-1. The total opposite in Moscow was CSKA hosted Khimki in a very boring 0-0 draw. Akhmat's defeated Loko 2-1 away from home. Dinamo stuck 5 past Arsenal and absolutely ran riot, particularly in the first half, with a really nice performance. Rubin got a little bit of a surprising result, potentially, away to Sochi, winning 2-1 and kind of halting their chase to try and defeat Zenit at the top of the league. As we speak, Ural and Sochi this weekend are currently drawing 0-0. Ural again with some really exciting youngsters, Ramzan Gajimuradov and Luka Gagnicha both starting in midfield. Unfortunately, Eric Bukvalvi is up front with his Zimmer frame again. But we will now move straight into the European games. And to do so, I forgot to introduce both of you, getting too wrapped up in the fixtures from last week. But we are joined, as always, by David.
Yo.
And Richard.
Hey guys, how we going?
So Richard's back from a couple of weeks off. He's been out from injury. Unfortunately, due to the lateness, there was no substitutions that we could get in time for him. But Richard's great to have you back. We were going to get straight into Zenit's game on Tuesday, away to Malmo. This basically decided who would be getting through to the Europa League, barring any sort of miraculous result from either side in the last round of fixtures. But all Zenit had to do was avoid defeat, courtesy of their victory against Malmo at home in the second game week earlier on in the group stages. And Richard, it looked like for a very, very long time in the match that they weren't going to do that.
Yeah, this was almost the first half of the game, especially. This was almost like being transported back in time a year, to the campaign in the last year in the Champions League. First half, I thought Zenit were really poor. I didn't think they played well. Malmo went in at half-time deservedly with a 1-0 lead. Just generally, yeah, I thought the conditions should have suited Zenit, really, because if you think about it, Malmo had to win this game to guarantee any kind of European football, to still be with a chance of any kind of European football after Christmas. They had to win this game. So, they obviously came out on the front foot and attacked, and I thought that would work to Zenit's advantage because there'd be more space. So when Zenit get the ball, they could, pass between the lines quicker and open them up and score. So I thought it would work to Zenit's advantage. But first half, I thought, it was really sloppy from them. They gave the ball away quite a bit. I actually think as well, it could have been worse. They had Malmo, I think, had a decent shout for a penalty. The big striker Cholak, I did see, was it Lovren? He had his arms around him in the penalty box. Now, you always take a risk when you do that, I find. I thought, some refs might have given it, but, they didn't. But even nonetheless, Malmo, I thought, deserved to be ahead at the break. Second half, Zenit were better. And on the overall, if you analyse the whole game, I think Zenit did deserve a point. They had more chances than Malmo. I think Malmo scored with their only shot on target. But again, the late penalty that Zenit got was the second in the game. I'd say it was, I don't actually think the second penalty was a penalty. But then again, conversely, you could say the penalty that Juventus got on match day 4 against Zenit when Chiesa, let's just say, went down very, very easily in the penalty box was not a penalty. So you could argue that Zenit got a bit of the rub of the green there, which they didn't get 3 weeks earlier. But yeah, it was not a great performance. And this is probably feeding onto, let's just say, a worrying stat. Since Sergei Samat took charge of Zenit at the start of the 2018-19 season, he's yet to win away from home in European competition. And these are all the sides that Zenit have played in Europe since Samat took charge: Dinamo Minsk, Molde, Bordeaux, Slavia Prague, Copenhagen, Lyon, Leipzig, Benfica, Dortmund, Lazio, Bruges, Chelsea, Juventus, and Malmo. Now, out of all those 12 teams, I think, or 14 teams, you'd probably say Malmo are one of the amongst the 3 or 4 weakest if you look at on paper and reputation of league. So you can forgive away from home against the likes of Chelsea or Juventus not winning, but not winning away at Malmo is, let's just say, it's a bit concerning for what probably going to come after the winter break, because obviously they're going to be in the round of 32 in the Europa League and they're going to get a decent side. We've seen in the last couple of match days in the Champions League that some good sides are going to drop into the Europa League post-Christmas. So Zenit are going to have to step it up. We need to see the performances again from when they played against the likes of Chelsea at Stamford Bridge earlier this season. We need to see those kind of battling displays away from home, because that performance against Malmo, I thought, especially in the first half, was a little bit worrying. But they pulled it together and got the point that they needed. I'm just so thankful that they did, because I didn't want it to go to the last match day, because you just literally never know. But they can relax a little bit now. Let's just get the Chelsea game out the way and see what they get in the Europa League playoff draw. Got away with it a little bit, but they're through, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, certainly. It's I think we've mentioned before ourselves that it was a very difficult draw for them. But it's very difficult, obviously, with Chelsea and Juventus in there. But I do believe that Zenit being lower seeded, not immediately going into pot 1, is potentially a better thing for them. Which may sound a little bit like an antithesis of the reasoning of why you would want to be first seeds. But every time Zenit have been first seeds, it's been a very even group. And every single team has looked at Zenit and played and been sort of driven on by the fact that Zenit are the one that everybody wanted in pot 1. Whereas because you've got now in pot 3, because you've got Juventus in there, because you've got Chelsea in there, it's the fourth pot is more often than not minnows. So that Juve and Chelsea are very, very unlikely going to drop points against Malmo. So it's making Zenit's job for progression into the Europa League easier. That might not want to be what Zenit fans hear, because Zenit, the size of the club, how rich they are, the recent prestige they've had, you would like to think that they can get through the knockout stages of the Champions League, not the Europa League. But if the last couple of years are anything to go by, then certainly not. There's some bizarre comments since the game I've noticed in the Russian press. It was the famous commentator Gennady Orlov. He basically spoke of his dissatisfaction with the criticism that Zenit received. He claims that the penalty in favour of Zenit was the good decision, both of which. He said, "This is not Soviet football. There is a letter of the law and we must adhere to it." They claim, they as in those in the media, that Semak is a coward. He himself understands they think this, but he's a champion of the country 3 times, and it basically goes on this very bizarre rant that's very much in defence of Zenit. Generally, people's criticisms were of the profligacy in front of goal, just poor game management, poor game plan against what is a substantially worse side than themselves. David, do you think that the criticism was a little bit harsh on Zenit, or warranted, considering you look at that performance and then compare it to ones earlier when there was minutes away from getting something against Juve, very respectable game in Chelsea in London?
They got the job done. It might not have been pretty by the sounds of it. And even if they had lost, it would still been, not the best of chances for Malmo to go through. We knew that going there, they basically were fine, no matter what the result. Obviously, they scraped it with a last minute dodgy pen. So I don't know. I mean, you can criticise, but they did what they needed to do. They're through, and now they can go into the last game against Chelsea relatively, comfortable. I was going to say comfort free, but that's the complete opposite. So yeah, they can take it easy now, and yeah. So I'm not sure. I mean, ideally you'd have wanted something a bit more conclusive. The first leg against Malmo, the home fixture, Malmo had a red card, which sort of tied things up for them. But Zenit, up to that point, had been largely the better side. Obviously, every time going away from home is difficult. And obviously, Malmo were just up for it on that particular occasion. Zenit were missing Asmoon, so not completely at full strength. And, we know how good him and Zuber are together. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a big issue to complain about it at this point.
Yeah, I think as often is the case in these situations, the middle ground is usually the safest place to be, where granted they have qualified for the next round, for winter football after winter in Europe. They went there and job done, they didn't lose, but I think the criticism on the performance is fair. That Zenit should be far outperforming Malmo, and especially in direct comparison to the other games in the group. But I just find these sort of comments from Orlov and others like him very bizarre. It's almost like you're not allowed to criticize people because that's my job. It's just so hypocritical. It's ridiculous. Richard?
Yeah, just in general about the criticism. I think the problem Zenit kind of suffer from in a way really is because at the minute they are the dominant side in Russian football. It's almost doing a bit of an RB Salzburg kind of situation like they are in Austria, aren't they? They're going to be judged on their performances in Europe, not just on their performances domestically. And yeah, I mean, what's coming in a couple of years' time, we know with the coefficient drop that soon the champions of Russia, and you assume Zenit are going to be champions of Russia in the next few years and things like that. Eventually, the Russian champions are not going to get automatic qualification for the group stages of Champions League. They're going to drop down into they have to go through the Champions path for qualifying, aren't they? So Zenit in the Champions path are probably going to come against more sides like Malmo to qualify for the group stages of the Champions League. So I think, yeah, it's not the away games against the likes of Juve and Chelsea which are a problem because, if you go there, you put in a respectable performance like they did against Chelsea, look a much better side than what they did in past Champions League seasons, then that's good. But it's the worrying thing is this away form against your Copenhagen's, your Dynamo Minsk's, your Molders. I mean, except the first season in Europe when they played against Dynamo Minsk and Molde, that was not Samac's squad. Obviously now we know that this is Samac's squad. So I think some of the criticism is fair. Probably a little bit overboard, maybe some of it, but like I said, they job done. But I think some of the criticism is fair. So
if we do move on from Zenit now, I think it's time to focus on. I've just had a little bit of PTSD because I've just realised that Ola Toivonen plays for Malmo. He's been out injured since May, but that's a little bit of Sunderland Premier League era PTSD because Ola Toivonen was absolutely horrific. But if we do move on to the biggest result of the midweek, and that was Spartak's 2-1 win over Napoli at the Otkritia. They went ahead with two early goals from Alexander Sobolev, a 3-minute penalty, and then a goal just before the half-hour mark. Went into the break 2-0 up. They did concede a goal on the hour mark from Elif Elmas, but held off a very tense and frankly very difficult to watch second half with a pretty excellent defensive rearguard performance. I thought Obviously, Sobolev was excellent with his 2 goals. Victor Moses had a really nice game on the right until he went off with injury late on. But who impressed me the most? Probably Nail Umarov in midfield again, dictating play against a very competent opponents in Zielinski and Lobotka in the first half, and then just kept things tight, kept things ticking over in the second. And actually, apart from, obviously, Alexander Selikov, who continues his resurgence, I thought he was man of the match, aside from Sobolev. But Maximiliano Corfrier, again, having a very solid performance. His job is more limited. He's not expected to carry the ball out of defence like you would see that those mazy runs from Gijo, but really solid defensively. And since he's came back in the fold for Raskazov on that right-hand side in Europe, Spartak's last 2 performances have been excellent from a defensive perspective. David, you watched all of Spartak Napoli. Was there anyone who in particularly stood out for you? And this was, for me, very much what we were sold on Vittorio before he signed.
I'm in agreement. I think Selikov, particularly in the first half, Selikov was unbelievable. He made at least 3 or 4 ridiculous saves. There was one from the Napoli number 7. I don't know who it is. That might be Elmas actually with the long hair. Where I don't know how he had such a strong arm, but he just stuck his arm out and it just stayed solid at full extension, and just blocked this shot, and the ball bounced a good distance away. It was, and that was a point blank. It was an unbelievable stop. There were many others in the first half. He was great. We're not going to be surprised if he keeps the number 1 spot for the rest of the year now. Until the end of till the winter break comes in. Maximenko, I'm sure we'll have to deal with sitting on the bench, but he deserves it. And we have to think back to Selikov was once one of the most promising goalkeepers in Russia when he was coming through for Amkar, and he got his move to Spartak. And I don't think he was ever dropped because of form particularly, but mainly just had his career curtailed due to a series of terrible injuries. He couldn't seem to get a break, so we have to hope that he can keep fit, because we know on his day how good a goalkeeper he can be, and I think we've done it a number of times. The depth of quality of Russian goalkeeping. There's so many goalkeepers who are of a good standard in Russia, and particularly as just shot stoppers. Maybe it's all the ice hockey they had when they were younger. They might not be the best at all this other stuff to do with goalkeeping. Like Maximenko's weak point is coming for balls from corners and stuff like that. But when it comes to shot stopping, a lot of goalkeepers, I'm watching Pomazun here for Ural against Sochi, who are playing right now, and even he in the first half here has made an unbelievable reaction stop. And he's a guy who I'm sure will go in and replace Akinfeev. But getting back to Spartak. Selikov, great. Umarov, I've been heaping praise on him recently. I really think he is a player who can go and play abroad. I think his style is some of the most non-Russian out of any Russian player. He's a player who would easily slot in a Spanish team or just somewhere in Europe. His style is very translatable across teams in terms of how he plays in that midfield, and I think his ability is just growing by the day at the moment. Those two were very good. Sobolev did a good job. It was just a solid performance all round for the most part. I could see that they were going to be limiting Napoli to not the best of chances. Hanny was having kittens in a chat that we have, and I put out a tweet in the first half when they went 2-0 saying, "Wow, they're actually going to get a win," and he was begging me all game to delete it because he thought I was going to jinx it. And eventually I caved and deleted it for him because I think it was just to calm him down. Which I never do. I was firmly confident that they were going to hold out because I didn't think they were letting Napoli create clear-cut chances often. Napoli were having all the ball, but it wasn't necessarily always big chances. The only big chance they had was the goal, which was essentially a tap in at the back post from a cross. But aside from that, they didn't really test Selikov greatly in the second half, I don't think, despite having the lion's share of the play. So, an excellent performance, and the group is wide open, Hanu, again, I'm going to reference something that Hanu done on a piece of paper, very retro. He had written down all 27 scenarios for the remaining fixtures in the group, and to decipher what the chances are that Spartak might still go out. And I believe now that Leicester have beat Legia. There are 9 scenarios remaining in fixtures, and 2 of those will see Spartak finish 4th. So they've got a 7 in 9 chance of going through in one of the top 3 positions, and a 2 in 9 chance of going out, I believe. So fingers crossed, but excellent performance. I think that's the Spartak Twitter feed put out. Napoli have lost once in La Ligue all year, or something like that, but Spartak have beaten them twice in Europe. So it's massively impressive.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. That was going to be my next point, is getting on to Napoli themselves. Now, obviously, on the night, they were missing quite a range of big-name players. I mean, Insigne, Osimhen, Politano, Anguissa. So these are some serious first-team players that were out. But even against that and missing those players, their loss looked mundane. Spalletti was furious. Beforehand, I think it was actually after the last game when Spartak won in Naples, he said something, like he was responding to be like, how will they react? And he was like, oh, we will see in Moscow, like kind of like firing his players up, like we're going to go there and beat them there. And then I think that's kind of why he refused to shake Rui Vitoria's hand at the end, which is probably my favourite gif of the entirety of like the last 2 years in Russian football. It's definitely, I haven't even done the image yet. I haven't created the image, the header image for the podcast, but it's without a shadow of a doubt, it's going to be Rui Vitoria shaking his head. It's brilliant. I could kind of understand why Spalletti did that, because he's A, furious that they've lost, and B, he's made himself look like an idiot after what he said last time. But regardless of who was missing for them, Spartak can only play the 11 that's against them, and they were really, really good. It was weird because for most of the time in Europe, they played a quite distinctive back three. This kind of looked like it was morphing between a 3 and a 4-4-2, which is very difficult to do, and it's quite risky because you're playing a very talented side, even with those players missing. And it requires real strong communication levels between the players and energy levels as well to consistently shift positions like that. The alternation of the pivot was really nice, and I think that was probably my favorite part of the entire performance, was just the maturity of Umyarov, Litvinov, and Ignatov in that midfield to play the way that they did, to dictate in the first half, to know when to run, to know the maturity of the 3 of them as a trio, to know how to control Napoli in second half especially. Yes, Spartak did give away a lot of possession, it did give away a lot of territory, but like you said, David, I mean, Selikov was called upon in the second half, but very few clear-cut chances. It was actually in the first half when Spartak were 1 or 2-0 up, that Napoli had their best chances of the game, apart from the goal, which was a given. It was really, really nice performance from them too, and it was nice to see Quincy Promes playing better again, because I think he's been pretty poor for quite some time now. Not being the greatest of returns so far, to be quite frank, but very impressed by the performance and the different levels of how they are showing it. I just worry that under Vitoria, Spartak are not very stable. I would like to see them stabilise as a side, and this has just been something that's plagued Spartak for some time, since Carrera, where they change formations so often and change personnel very often. Obviously, they can't really change personnel now because there's a cavalcade of injuries, but they can really inconsistent. Dreadful a few weeks ago. Awful against Zenit in the 7-1, then go back to draw with Leicester. Real poor game at the weekend against Krasnodar, in which Krasnodar pretty much dominated. And then again here, real nice performance. So I think it's potentially something to get used to, that you're going to have so many youngsters in and around the squad. But to quickly finish on Spartak, David, you've been keeping an eye on some of the Spartak 2 players. And of course, Spartak 2 are currently drawing 1-1 in the Finnet L with Tekstilchik. Vladislav Shitov, Denis Markov, and Daniil Denisov were all on the bench midweek. Now, if it wasn't for the injuries to Hendricks, Maslov, Zobnin, Ponsa, Melkadze even, they wouldn't be on the bench. But it does seem like there's quite a nice little crop of youngsters coming through at Spartak, including the Shitov brothers that you've mentioned before.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, as you say, Denisov, Shitov recently getting on the bench for the first time. We talked about him, the under-19 squad. Melnikov's been on the bench a few times in the league as well, all from the Spartak 2 team. I remember at the start of the year, Voropayev was training with the team because he's a left-back, and Spartak were looking for a left-back, especially a Russian one, but obviously he's ended up dropping back down. So just mentioning that game, I saw that Tekstilchik scored an equaliser, and then the player who scored was immediately sent off. So I had a quick look as to why he got sent off. And you know when a player puts their shirt over their face to celebrate? He got a second yellow for that, which I didn't know was... I thought you could get a yellow for taking his shirt off entirely, but just for putting it over his head, he got a second yellow, which I thought was very harsh. I don't know if it's in the rules or not. But yeah, there's a nice group. Spartak 2 having a much better season than last season, where they were very close to being relegated. They're comfortably in mid-table at the moment, and they have games one week where they play ridiculously well, and then another week where they don't play so well. But it's a big improvement. The Shitov twins, obviously, two different players. You've got Vlad Shitov, who's a striker. He's quite clinical, off the last shoulder sort of player. Reminds me a little bit of like a young Ivan Ignatiev, how he used to play when he was playing at these sort of levels. And then Vitaly Shitov is a winger who he has the most dribbles in the FNL this season. He attempts like 14 a game or something ridiculous like that. Obviously, last year we had Oganessian and Marketesov coming through, and they both appeared for the senior side at one point or another, but they both sort of either missed their chance to fully get into that team. They're still young; they're still only both 20, but maybe they've missed that boat potentially. They're the sort of players like a Soltmarad Bukayev, who's going to maybe go to a mid-range RPL team and do well there. But I've been impressed recently with Konstantin Shiltsov, who I remember he was in amongst the Spartak first team a couple of years ago when Tedesco was involved. But he's still only 19, and he's been playing quite well for the second team of play. So yeah, there's a nice group there coming through. It's Spartak. They're always going to have talented players. They're the biggest club in Russia. They're going to have, and the biggest club in Moscow. So they're always going to have their chance to have the best pick of the players. So it's just a case of them nurturing. But in recent years, we've seen a good lot coming through. So it's a nice trend they've got going on right now.
Yeah, I remember Shiltsov when he made the bench last year. I think it was towards the end of the year against Arsenal Tula when Zhikia was injured, and I think he did return to the bench, but he was injured before that. And Kutupov started and scored a ridiculous own goal and injured himself while doing so. That was, I think Shiltsov was on the bench. I'm sure Litvinov made his debut.
Yeah, I think Shiltsov maybe even played like 2 minutes at the end of one match.
It was.
If I recall.
Gapanov played. It was when Tedesco was also willing. I mean, Spartak, to be fair, their success rate at getting players from these two team to the first regularly is not the greatest, as you would expect, because it's harder for players to come through with higher level teams. But they do consistently. One of the things that Spartak do, and I don't really, you know, I'm not sitting praising Spartak too often because it just annoys me how the club's being run. But to their credit, they are very good at providing a pathway to the first team, even if it is just temporarily, and even if it is just allowing the younger players to mix with the first team, to understand men's football, to get experience of training with the first team. And one of the reasons for that, and is why I've always been a big proponent of why elsewhere should do it, is the unlimited substitutes on the bench. I think it's a great idea to get the youngsters into the squad. I mean, I've just got that game up there as I've been talking. And Timo Akmerson was even called up to the bench that game in goal alongside Artyom Rebrov. It was when Maxi was injured, so Selikov started. Akmerson's never been seen in the first team since, but he's 24 now, I think. He's not going to stay at Spartak much longer. But that experience would have been vital for him, vital for his understanding of men's football. And that is one of the good things in Russian football in general, and Spartak really take advantage of it. The ability to give the youngsters a bench seat and just get experience and then potentially get them on the pitch as well. Richard, have you got any final words on Spartak before we move on to Lokomotiv?
Yeah, great win for Spartak that against Napoli. I was not expecting it. Fantastic to get 6 points out of 6 against Napoli. And, we're drawing the final game against Legia and they qualify for Europe after Christmas. I'm a little bit conflicted. Do I want them to drop into, do I want them to carry on in the Europa League or drop into the Europa Conference League? Because obviously the Europa League is going to be very tough from the knockout rounds onwards, especially when you see some of the sides who are going to be in Europe after Christmas in the second tier competition. The third tier competition, I think Spartak possibly could go on a little run in that. But obviously, yeah, just to be in Europe post Christmas would be great, considering that group that they draw, that they were given, if they win it, if they win the final game and Napoli beat Leicester, then that's probably the best case scenario for everybody, because then they win the group and they get a bye into the round of 16, which for Russian clubs would be really ideal, because if you think about it, we've always said that when the European football comes back, it's at the end of February, and the sides are always finding it difficult to adapt back to regular first team competitive games, because obviously they've had a long winter break. Whereas the round of 16 of the Europa League after Christmas would be in the middle of March, so they would have had 3-4 RPL games plus a Russian Cup match to ease themselves back in. So it actually could work to their advantage. Could be fresh legs. So yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. Actually, probably is best for Napoli to win that game.
Yeah, hopefully. David said when Hani was going through all the potential permutations, it also wouldn't surprise me if Spartak did finish fourth, but hopefully they can get through, because it seems like there's a bit of a tall order for Lokomotiv to get through to any European games after Christmas. Now, they lost midweek 3-0 to Lazio. I'm going to quickly summarise the game myself, then I'll go back to you, Richard, for a quick opinion, but we're not going to spend too long on Lokomotiv, as we will be spending longer later on in the pod regarding Ralf Rangnick. But first half was decent from Loco, obviously playing a vastly superior side that they just lost against in what's been a pretty poor overall performance so far in the Champions League this year, and then shot themselves in the foot. Ciro Immobile with a brace of penalties. Lokomotiv just fell apart at the back. Real poor defending, really poor for the second one, if I remember rightly, in particular, and then were undone by a late Pedro goal for 3-0. As things stand, Loco are currently bottom of the group with no wins from 5 and only 2 points, but they could still make it to the Conference League, irrespective of Galatasaray or Lazio's results, because their next game is against Marseille, and that is a straight shootout for Conference League football. So even though Lokomotiv have been dreadful this this European window, but they could still actually have football after Christmas in Europe, which is a little bit wild. Richard, you watched the game and you weren't really enthused looking at your comments in our chat.
No, it was disappointing. I thought there was a moment just before half-time in the latter bits of the second half where they were coming into it a little bit more. But then the second half, yeah, they just fell apart. Silyanov, I don't know what he was doing. It was always a risky challenge when in the box, when he slid in and took the Lazio player down. And, the VAR review resulted in a penalty. And then I think after that moment, Lokomotiv just fell apart. They gave away a second penalty. The second penalty was a 50-50 call, but it was given. Definitely, the first one was definitely a penalty. But no complaints overall. I think Lazio just got hold of the game in the second half and proved that they are a much better side than Lokomotiv at the minute. It was always going to be a tough ask for them to beat Lazio, whether it's home or away, because they're a very, very good side with top players. And the crazy thing about it all is that, yeah, as you were saying, James, that Lokomotiv still have a chance to gain Europe after Christmas. They obviously have to beat Marseille away. It's a funny one though, because Marseille are one of those sides they tend to, with such a degree of frequency, they tend to switch between the brilliant and the shambolic, almost from match day to match day, from game to game. You still won't write it off. I think it's unlikely because, let's be honest, since Gisdol came in at Lokomotiv, I think, it's been no improvement on Nikolic. I can probably count, the improvement, the good displays by Lokomotiv on one hand since he come in. Probably the Galatasaray away draw and the home win against Sochi, but there's not really been a huge amount else which has really got you out of your seat regarding Lokomotiv since Gisdol came in. So it would be nice to see them go through into the Conference League post-Christmas, but I'm having my doubts because the game's away from home especially. But you never know. You just have to wait and see.
Yeah, pretty poor away from home in Lokomotiv. They've got a worse record than even Zenit and Spartak away from home. We have covered it previously, but I personally am not particularly optimistic about their chances. But hey, let's hope for the best. I think the best performance in the group so far was the opening game against Marseille. So hopefully they can do that again. Now, we'll move on from European football to international football for a quick segue. But the 2022 World Cup playoff draw took place on Friday afternoon, the 26th of November. Now, the draw was, of course, to determine the European playoffs for the World Cup. The playoffs will take place in March. The semi-finals on the 24th of March and the final on the 29th of March. So the draw was provided 3 pathways to the World Cup. The 6 the 6 best ranked runners-up from the group stages of the qualifying were allocated to pot 1, and thus were given a home semi-final leg. And the remaining 6 teams were allocated to pot 2. So Russia were seeded for the draw, along with Italy, Portugal, Scotland, Sweden, and Wales. The non-seeded sides were Austria, Czech Republic, North Macedonia, Poland, Turkey, and Ukraine. So those were determined on a variety of factors, and it turns out that, and then they had a second draw to decide which of the teams would play at home in the finals. And thus, Path A is Wales and Austria will play each other, and they will play the winners of Scotland, Ukraine. Path B, which is Russia's path, Russia play Poland in the semi-final, and for the finals, if they beat Poland, would play the winners of Sweden versus Czech Republic. And then Path C, Portugal, Turkey, and Italy, North Macedonia. Overall, I think a very respectable group and a respectable path for Russia to the finals. Obviously, all are difficult games. None of the games at this stage are going to be easy, but crucially have avoided... they avoided Ukraine because Russia and Ukraine weren't allowed to be drawn together for geopolitical reasons, but crucially have avoided Portugal and Italy, who were both in Path C, so only one of Portugal or Italy will make the World Cup finals in Qatar. David, do you want to give any quick analysis on that, or just it's very easy? They avoided who they needed to avoid and have got respectable games.
Yeah, it's not the worst draw they could have got, and it's not the best draw they could have got. It's you would take the draw. I think the game against Poland is just as difficult as the game that will come afterwards against Sweden or the Czechs. Poland are no mean feat. So yeah, but I would like to think winnable fixtures, especially at home, and that if the right Russia turn up, obviously we talked about it before about Zuba, should probably be in this squads for these games. But certainly a draw that gives Russia a good chance of making it.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, and that's all they need to do is get to the World Cup, and that's be successful for Russia. Finally, I mean, we did just want that one as a quick segue just to update everybody. But the biggest story that happened midweek regarding Russian football is arguably the potential agreement for Lokomotiv director of football, Ralf Rangnick, to be going to Manchester United. So this started earlier on in the week as just rumours and conjecture. And then I think it was The Athletic who were the first to have the exclusive and say that he will become their interim manager. And this was via David Ornstein on theathletic.com. He claims that Rangnick has agreed in principle with Manchester United to become their interim manager. They understand that the agreement was subject to Rangnick's current club, of course, Lokomotiv, agreeing to release him from his contract, although Manchester United do not anticipate this to be a problem. Rangnick has agreed a 6-month deal until the end of May and will have a further 2 years in a consultancy role. Now, he is awaiting a work permit, according to The Athletic. Just today, the BBC Sport have claimed that the agreement has been reached with Rangnick, and it's a matter of time before he takes over as first interim manager and then secondly a consultancy role. So before I ask yourselves your opinion on Rangnick's time in Lokomotiv and potential for Manchester United, I'll give a quick summary of Rangnick's time at Lokomotiv. So he initially, of course, started as a consultant for the club, working very closely with the owners in future direction, more so, and just like I say, advisory role. He then was given the position of sporting director, I think was the official term, but all intents and purposes it is director of football. Came in and upset and overhauled what was probably quite a well set squad. Granted, it was an aging squad, had just lost one of its best components in Lyosha Maranchuk, but then he splurged 30 million euros in the transfer market. I think it's quite fair to accept that players like Bekar, Girano Kirk are good players. Bekar certainly has a very good future in front of him, but a lot of Lokomotiv fans questioned why they needed such an overhaul, aside from bringing in some youth. He then had a falling out with Marko Nikolic. The two did not really meet eye to eye. Nikolic, midway through this season, changed from his favoured formation of what was a 4-4-D in diamond formation in midfield to the Rangnick's tried and tested 4-2-2-2, very high pressing, very narrow but very attacking. It did not work in the least. Nikolic had a series of terrible results playing that, leading to lots of rumours and accusations on VK and Twitter and Telegram that he was sabotaging him and wanting to replace the man. That did duly happen. He replaced him with Marcus Gisdol, who has worked with Rangnick in the past and has been kind of widely ridiculed after his appointment by those who know German football quite well, claiming that everywhere he'd been, he basically was the opposite of Midas, where everything he touched turned to shit. Now he's leaving, having left potentially Thomas Zorn in charge, which is not really a good thing after what he did at Spartak. But in that time, just overhaul on the pitch, overhaul off the pitch. Lokomotivs, yes, the ages went down. Yes, they have some promising players, some promising signings like Nayer Tiknizian, Konstantin Maradashvili, and then the aforementioned other players. But he's brought in around 10 staff members. It's just been a huge overhaul and very unstable time. Now, Igor Rabiner reports that Lars Kornetka, who is Rangnick's consultancy partner, will become their new sporting director, working alongside Zorn. So it seems as if the project isn't being abandoned for now, if Rabiner is right, in which he more often is correct than not. But it's been not a great time for Lokomotiv. David, first, how do you take Rangnick's time at Loco? And it's really not went to plan or all the excitement that we all expected, has it?
No, I mean, as to put it in the simplest terms, are Loco in a better or worse position having had Rangnick at the club, and you'd say they're in a worse position. Not even at a similar position. You would say it's worse than where they were when he arrived. Yeah, I mean, transfers a mixed bag. Becca definitely the highlight. Has been really good. Maradishvili's becoming quite good. Obviously, we all thought they overspent on Tiknisian, which they probably did. Jedvaj has been a solid starter, and then Kirk has sort of yet to prove himself, particularly up top. But but then on the opposite side, obviously, let Kukoviak go, and the manager, everything else. So, in general, it's not going well. Results haven't changed. If anything, they've gotten worse. There's all these rumours of discontent and forcing Nikolic to play certain players. It's not the most redeeming spell, and I think most United fans and a lot of British media are sort of just blissfully ignoring the fact that for the last 6 months he's been working on a project which has not done well at all. I'm seeing very few mentions of the fact that he's leaving Lokomotiv in a worse state than when he arrived. Granted, it's been 6 months, and it's he was brought in as a long-term project, and it's a shame that he would walk out on a project after such a short amount of time. But that's the risk, I suppose, you get when you bring in a big name like him, that he's going to be in high demand. And with this other guy, I'm sure Rangnick will always still have a slight hand in what happens at Loco with this guy in charge, and the fact that it's sort of his consulting agency sort of looking after it. But it's not been the dream we were all hoping when Rangnick arrived. I think the best thing to come out of it will be Becca, who, as a young French midfielder, will have suitors in Europe. With the way he's playing, will definitely have suitors in Europe in the next year or two. And Loco, I'm sure, will make a nice profit on him based on how he's playing at the moment. But other than that, it's not been the best spell.
No, not in the least. And Richard, how do you feel that he will get on at Manchester United? Obviously, they are an absolute basket case behind the scenes. There are question marks over who's running the club, why Ed Woodward is still there, and why he's extending his leaving date. What the Glazers' impetus is and input is, what they actually want from the club, apart from their signing off their weekly dividends. There's been clamour from the fans for them to create a real footballing structure behind the scenes. There's question marks over who is in charge of the football, because they seem to, none of which really know a direction of the club where to go in the long term, and they're just passing from pillar to post between club legend to club legend, or past name manager to past name manager, to do what they want and then leave them back at route one. And question marks over who's in charge. So what sort of remit do you think Rangnick would get, and do you think he could be successful at Manchester United?
I think the first thing to acknowledge here is that the first 6 months of Rangnick's time at Manchester United obviously going to be as an interim coach. Now, obviously, what I think Manchester United have probably looked at, they've probably looked at it with Carrick and thought, is it a bit long to give Carrick an interim position for? That's probably why they were probably wanting, all the talk when Solskjaer was sacked about there being an interim and then an interim manager, so they were probably under the impression that giving Carrick 6 months is probably a bit much because it's his first job in football. He's not been retired too long a player. So I think I can understand why they were keen on bringing Rangnick in as an interim coach till the end of the season first up, because he's got a lot of experience coaching, even though recently he's been, doing more, in director of football and consultancy roles rather than actual coaching. So I think to the end of the season, Rangnick could do quite well as a interim coach at Manchester United. I think the best they can probably hope for in the Premier League is the top four, and then maybe a cup run in the FA Cup, and possibly just about being competitive in the Champions League knockout rounds. If Rangnick can do that, then it's a salvage operation well done if they finish top four and maybe win the FA Cup. possibly do okay in the knockout rounds of the Champions League. It's at the end of the season where I think the fireworks are really going to start with Rangnick, because he's obviously signed this 2-year consultancy role at Manchester United after his interim manager period ends. But the question you have to ask yourself is, how much of a leash is Rangnick going to get at Manchester United? You know, how much say is he going to have on transfer policy? Is it going to be just a purely advisory role, or is he going to be more hands-on and want more control over specific signings at Manchester United? I know I'm tempted and intrigued to see just how much of a leash he's going to be given by the Glazers at the club, because obviously, it's Manchester United, as you were saying earlier, James, they've been a bit of a basket case club in terms of recruitment, in terms of management off the pitch, probably for the last 2-3 years. Well, probably arguably since Alex Ferguson left the club, it's been all a bit of a mismatch. But especially in the last 2-3 years, when it comes to recruitment, they've seemed to have, really lost their way. So I think that's what's going to be the most fascinating thing of all. I understand why Rangnick has gone to Manchester United, because I guess the lure of coaching a team as big as that, Rangnick is, I think, in his early 60s now, so it probably wasn't going to come. It is a little bit disappointing that he is leaving Lokomotiv, but ultimately, yeah, it's not worked out here at the club quite the way they would have imagined when he came. But, I can understand why, when a club like Man United come calling, it is difficult to refuse it, especially at Rangnick's age now. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think as a short-term caretaker option, as I mentioned earlier, caretaker manager option to the end of the season, potentially it could work out for them, but it'll be fascinating to see what happens at the end of the season in how deep this consultancy role at Man United is, and how much of a leash, how much control he's going to be given by the Glazers. And, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. So, but yeah, it's all a bit frustratingly unfortunate for Lokomotiv, because they were building something last couple of seasons, and now you think they've just gone back a little bit backwards, really, which is a bit of a shame, because they're probably not going to qualify for Europe next season. They still might, but not going to be in the Champions League or Europa League. It's probably going to be Conference League at best. So, yeah. But yeah, it's going to be a fascinating state of developments over the next couple of months and years at Manchester United for Rangnick, and what Loco do now will be equally fascinating as well.
Yeah, and just to bring it back round to Loco to finish off, did mention that we would discuss their game midweek, and it was just more of the same from what I've seen from Gisdol so far. If you look at Gisdol's results, I think he's defeated as manager. They've defeated Nizhny and Sochi, drew with Spartak, drew with Galatasaray, lost against Lazio, lost against Akhmat, and lost against Galatasaray as well. So it's really been a mixed bag at best, at very best, and that's being kind as well. And in the first half, they did defend quite resolutely. They did hold back Lazio, and this is a good Lazio side, and they were playing really good football under Maurizio Sarri. Their aggressive pressure caused a lot of problems for Lazio. Their real high press, I thought, was really good in the first half. It wasn't ideal. They did allow Lazio to progress behind them quite often. They're still working on that, and it is, of course, a long-term thing. But what it did allow quite often was Lokomotiv to steal the ball in Lazio's half. I think in the first half alone, they stole it like 4 or 5 times in Lazio's half. And that half was absolutely perfect, really. Really high turnovers, real high pressure, very solid first half. Defence didn't have the greatest amount to do because their attack started from the top of the pitch. But then Sarri adjusted. He dropped Immobile deeper and pushed people in behind them. And basically what it did was it overloaded in midfield, and Lokomotiv's midfield couldn't handle that. And then Gisdol didn't know how to respond. His initial plan was very bold. I really liked it. That's typical what you would see from a Rangnick team. But once Immobile would drop deeper, the midfield would push up. It would literally just be, Becca Bakar would likes to drift anyway, so it would just be Baranov surrounded by 3-4 Lazio players, and it was just far too much for them to handle. So Sarri changed the game with his tactical decision. And Gisdol didn't have a clue how to respond to that. Yes, Lazio are a far better team, and yes, his own side are only learning the pressing system. It's very high energy, very intensive, and only really had enough to deal with Lazio for 50, 60 minutes or so until they scored. But it's a little bit worrying that again, and this isn't the first time, it was the same in the Spartak game, that he can't change a game at all. I don't think Lokov came behind to win once or get anything from any games, just about apart from the 2-2 draw early in his reign against Lazio, I think it was. Very poor from the manager, but brave. I'll give him that, brave. Richard, have you got any last thoughts on Lokomotiv and their game on Thursday?
Yeah, it's more on Gisdol, really. I'm just beginning to wonder with, obviously, it's all hypothetical now because Rangnick has gone to Manchester United, but just wondering, would he have been better off just waiting until the end of the season and then making a decision on Nikolic then? Because when you think about it, obviously, getting a manager to move mid-season, because they were linked with a few names, weren't they? Lokomotiv. I noticed Robert Klaus of Nuremberg in the second Bundesliga was being linked. But obviously, he's already in a job at the moment and might not want to move mid-season. So I'm just beginning to wonder at the end of the season, would they have had more of a, a better choice of manager to go for? Because obviously they had to approach Gisdol out of work. You've already seen with regards to Manchester United how difficult they've found it to get people out of contracts. They were being linked with Pochettino and Rodgers, weren't they? But obviously both of them probably either unwilling to move right now or the club's unwilling to release them. So yeah, when you're bringing in managers mid-season, you always normally have to go for someone out of work, and it's sometimes a little bit more complex. But yeah, it's not been great on the Gisdol so far. I mean, I'm still willing to give him a little bit of time, but let's just say all the early warning signs we were given about Gisdol from people in the know about German football have sadly looked like they're coming true. I hope he can turn it around, but I'm having my doubts, unfortunately.
Yeah, likewise. I think Rangnick did brilliantly at former clubs, particularly, of course, everyone will remember his work at Leipzig as manager and then director, and when he was in charge of Hasenhüttl's side. But I think there's too many Manchester United fans out there who are, and not just Manchester United fans, football fans in general, who may not support Man United, who are adjusting history and revising history to their own liking to try and push him further is a good option. They're ignoring what's went on at Lokomotiv in a club that's obviously nowhere near the size of Manchester United, successful as Manchester United, or just as a marketing giant as big as Manchester United, but also were in a far more stable place. They were quite settled squad who played really well in Europe last season with a manager who came in and largely impressed the majority of fans and pundits alike. And he went in, tore that up, and basically they're in no far worse position since. But there's also been a lot of misnomers going around, and I think it was Chris Williams, who was formerly of Football Grad, or well, their German website, I can't remember what it's called, and he said that he's just breaking his Twitter hiatus to emphatically say that Jurgen Klopp did not get his love of hard pressing from Ralf Rangnick, which he's read about 10 times this week, and that's everywhere. I think there was an article where it was like, he is the doctor who's the father of German football. And it's like Wolfgang Frank, and Chris goes on to say that Wolfgang Frank was Klopp's mentor, who in turn was influenced by Arrigo Sacchi, just like Bielsa and pretty much most managers of the modern day. So just be careful with what you wish for, because I mean, he might go to Manchester United and be brilliant. Some people just don't work out at certain clubs, and then they find the one who does fit, and it's great. But I think Manchester United's problems are far more than just getting in Rangnick as an interim coach on a consultancy basis. It's goes a lot deeper than that and rises far higher to the top. But anyway, that's everything on Lokomotiv and Rangnick for this week, and thus is the end of this week's pod. As at the time of recording, it is currently Ural 1, Sochi 1. It was Rafael Augustiniak with the opening goal in the first half, and Christian Aboaz literally just like 3 minutes ago, got on my second screen, equalised with a nice assist from Sergei Terekov. Elsewhere this weekend, Akhmat Rostov, Khimki Krasnodar, Nizhny Krylia, Rubin Dinamo, Siska Zenit, Ufa Spartak, as Ufa once again try and get one over on Spartak as their resident bogey team, of course, with Shamil Gazizov back in Ufa now. And Arsenal Lokomotiv, the last game of the weekend. We'll be back at the usual time next week, which is actually going to be a weekend one. We're shifting to a weekend podcast, so we'll try and get more football chat than we did this week, as opposed to more topical and generic and the European stuff. But just for everyone to know going forwards, we're shifting to weekends due to some scheduling conflicts and other things that are just occurring towards the end of the year. This has been the Russian Football News Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.